In this lesson I will show you how to make suncatchers. First I cut clear glass into rectangles. Then I cut black glass into thin strips for borders. Then I attach the borders along with jump rings to the clear rectangles. Then I create a frit painting of flowers, followed by an abstract frit painting. Finally, I will make a mosaic suncatcher. First I will be cutting clear glass into two 6 1/8 by 8 1/8 rectangular pieces. These will both be used for frit painting. I am only showing one cut since cutting glass was covered earlier. Next I cut 3/8" strips of grape iridescent glass for the borders. Borders are necessary for holding the artwork in place and to sandwich the loop rings, which will be shown later. This is done by making a 3/4 inch cut followed by a 3/8 inch cut. Notice I set up a second set of stops for the second cut. I use the running pliers to break the set of strips at the 3/4 inch mark. Now I cut the strips to length. Out of view in the left bottom corner I am setting a stop for the short side of the rectangle. I insert the 3/4 inch piece between the stop and the glass to be cut to reduce its dimension by the thickness of the borders. These short pieces will be inside the longer border pieces. Next I use running pliers to break the strips in two. When cutting strips I apply just enough pressure to break them apart. Notice I adjust the limit screw counterclockwise a little bit at a time. This is similar to the precise pressure shown earlier when making slight breaks on circles. This helps keep the edges square on all sides of the glass. Next I cut the shelf paper for the suncatchers. I don't have a template for this size, so I cut the paper 3/8 inch away from the glass edges. I place the shelf paper on a piece of cardboard and then center the glass piece on the shelf paper. The cardboard helps when moving the glass from one place to another. I will now place the border and jump rings on the clear sheets. Once again I wash the glass. High temperature nichrome wire is incorporated into the suncatcher to allow hanging. I bend the high temperature wire using wire bending pliers into a 180-degree bend. I then trim it to a 3/4 inch length. These are called jump rings with regard to glass fusing. Notice I check the length against the standard sample, which is 3/4 inch and cut with aviation snips. I clean the black border pieces, making sure the iridescent side is facing upwards. I apply glass-friendly adhesive along the glass edges. When I say glass-friendly, I mean an adhesive that burns off completely during firing and does not affect aesthetics. I typically use white rain hairspray because it dries fast. Some glues are thicker and some take longer to dry. I place the jump rings at the top of the rectangle. This is the most challenging part of the suncatcher process. The jump ring should be placed about 1 1/4 inch from the left and right sides. I use a tweezers for easier adjustment. Also, I place them over the top edge as far as possible without them falling off. I add more adhesive at the base of the jump rings. The top border floats on top of the jump rings. I place the border pieces around the rectangle flush to the edges and corners. In this case, I make sure the iridescent side of the glass is facing up. Once the borders are in place, I apply pressure on the top border. I carefully pull the jump rings outward using a tweezers until the bottom of the jump ring is even with the bottom of the top border. This can be challenging, requiring horizontal as well as vertical adjustments. Now I will create two frit paintings. The first is a group of 3 flowers. First I place what are known as pebbles for the center of the flowers. This is the first time I have added these to a frit painting. Pebbles can be purchased or created by stacking two square 7/16" pieces of glass and then fusing them together. I start sprinkling the coarse frit around the flower heads. Sometimes I pour directly out of the jar, but it is harder to control the frit placement. I typically pour frit into small pouring cups to make the frit application easier. Notice I have the project resting on top of a Lazy Susan so I can easily access different parts of the painting. During this process I use a small paintbrush to move the frit to the desired locations. I am now applying a light green medium-size frit to make the flower stalks. I use tweezers to move individual pieces of frit. Since the frit is irregularly shaped, this can be challenging sometimes. I now add sky blue coarse-sized frit to create the sky. Now I am adding dark green fine frit on top of the light green flower stems. I should have used dark green to begin with, since I will use light green for the ground. I now sprinkle light green fine frit to simulate grass. Note that since fine frit will shrink down more once fused versus the coarse frit, I must apply it to a greater thickness. I use a small paintbrush to level off the frit. Now I do a final touch-up to fill in any voids. I add large pieces of dark green coarse frit to simulate leaves on the flower stems. To make larger leaves I could have cut small pieces from a sheet of glass. The second frit painting will be a cool colored abstract of teal, blues and purples. Here are the colors I will use in this abstract frit painting. They are teal green, sky blue, blue topaz, light blue, dark blue, light purple and grape. I sprinkle the frit as shown before in the pattern desired. I tend to like swirls. Sometimes the frit can fall out faster than expected, requiring a bit of cleanup. As before, I touch up areas to fill voids as required. In this lesson I will create a suncatcher with a mosaic pattern of translucent colored triangles. Here are the colored triangles I will be using in the mosaic. Not all colors are used. I wanted a 6-inch by 8-inch mosaic of triangles. Therefore, when cutting the glass, I added 3/4 of an inch to the width and length to compensate for the border pieces. I also added an additional 1/8 inch to make sure all of the triangles fit in the frame. Some triangles are bigger than others. I wipe off each tile with a rag sprayed with glass cleaner before placing them on the glass. The theme for this piece was to have warm colored corners, moving to cooler colors as I progress inward. I generally follow the Roygov order, or red, orange, yellow, green, indigo or blue, and violet or purple. Though this piece is not a typical rainbow pattern, the general theme is used. If I started with cool colors in the corners, the center would have warmer colors. I also ensure that a darker piece is next to a lighter piece when I can, to improve contrast. Here, I decided to swap an orange triangle that was too similar in color to the orange one already placed. Sometimes I have to replace a triangle that is too large or too small, or doesn't have a perfect corner. I use a rubber-tipped shaping tool for moving the triangles around. Notice I had a hard time fitting in the last 4 triangles. I had to find smaller ones to complete the mosaic. I used a special suction tool to lift out the unwanted triangles.
That concludes Lesson 6 on how to make suncatchers. The next lesson will cover loading the kiln shelves and kiln, and running through a fusing cycle.